Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I'm talking about the new Ty West film MaXXXine. For those who've been watching my previous videos up to this point, I did review X and Pearl leading up to the release of this movie. So if you want to know my thoughts on those, I do have videos on those, some here on my channel. It should be one of the videos previous to this one. So for those who want to see my thoughts on those, I did review those first two installments leading up to this release. But today I'm talking about MaXXXine. This is the third and potentially final installment in the Ty West X trilogy. Um, this film, for the most part, does wrap up the story of Maxine Minx and her journey from X all the way to Maxine, and how the events of Pearl kind of also shaped how all these events have kind of played out up to this point as well. So for the most part, you guys, what Maxine is about, as far as the film goes, is we find Maxine in the 80s. It's several years since the events of X. She's been trying to kind of run away from that event and kind of find other film projects and other pursuits since the events of that movie. But she manages to kind of land her big break when she lands a role in a horror film called The Puritan II. And things start to look up for Maxine. She's living in the Los Angeles area. She still kind of sort of has that, adult film image to her a little bit still. Some people still remember her from her work with those kind of movies. So she's trying to get out of that image. She really is trying to land more mainstream kind of roles. And this Puritan II role is kind of her first big break from that. But things kind of get really tough for Maxine for a little bit because there's this thing called a Night Stalker case that's happening in Los Angeles. There's all these murders that are happening. All these young girls seem to be getting kidnapped and murdered and found in really brutal ways when their bodies are found, kind of, the shape that they're left in. And so obviously this is a very scary time for Maxine to pursue all these goals and, have some time where she has to, walk back home at night and stuff like that. And so there's all this stuff going on with this Night Stalker case, and the police are trying to figure it out. And of course, Maxine doesn't feel comfortable, being in this situation. But over the course of the film, we do find out who the Night Stalker is, how it does relate to the Maxine character, and how this impacts her with, this character running around in Los Angeles. We get to find out kind of the result of her working in this Puritan II role, and kind of how this successfully impacts her as an actress and lets her move forward as an actress. And we also kind of get to see how the events of X have impacted her as a person and how she moved forward from those events. But overall, guys, I enjoyed Maxine. It's a good movie. There's things about it that I really like that I'm going to get into here, my positives and negatives. I will say right off the bat, I do think this is the weakest installment in the X trilogy. I did think X and Pearl were much better films overall in this franchise. But don't get me wrong, there's things about Maxine that I really like that I'm absolutely going to bring up here in my positives. But there's also some things about it that I think could have been better. So if we do ever get a fourth installment in this franchise, Ty West has sort of hinted toward a potential fourth film if this film is successful, but we'll have to see how that plays out. But for my positives and negatives for this film, you guys, for the things that I really enjoyed about Maxine, the 1980s look and the aesthetic of this film was absolutely wonderful. It really does feel like you're watching something in the 80s. Whether it's the VHS video rental stores, or the music, or the neon lights, or the music, the cars that people drive around, how people kind of spend their weekends and stuff like that. It does play around with all that stuff. It looks wonderful. The aesthetic is great. Even the clothing on the characters look like something out of the 1980s. So as far as making it look like the era that it's trying to be set in, it looks great. The aesthetic is great. I'm sure some filter and camera effects were used to make it look like the camera's being used, look like something out of a 1980s film. So that aspect of the film I thought was absolutely wonderful. Another thing to expect from this film that's absolutely wonderful is Mia Goth as the Maxine Minx character. Love seeing her in this role once again. I really do feel like Mia Goth has made this character her own, whether it's making the character brave, making the character independent, making the character look out for herself, making the character stand out from the crowd. I think she's really kind of turned this character into something special over the course of this franchise. And even in Pearl, where she plays a different character, it does kind of feel like a character that's kind of forming the way that Maxine is going to become by the time the third film happens. So even with that performance from that film, it's really quite wonderful that we have three great performances now from her in all three of these X films. And if we do get a fourth film, I'll be very happy to see her again playing this character. And just her performance here, I thought, was absolutely wonderful. Absolutely. There's also a ton of connections and callbacks to X and Pearl and how that's formed MaXXXine and this part of her life, and how there's still some PTSD that she's dealing with from the events of X based off, for those who saw the film, obviously, I'm not going to spoil anything, but how some of the events in that film have shaped the person that she is, how she does kind of have to be a fighter, be the best of the best, be independent, be brave, be bold, stand up for yourself. There's just tons of things that connect back to the events of X and Pearl and how that really has kind of made MaXXXine the way she is, how there's still aspects of her past that haunt her. I thought all that was very well done over the course of this film. I also like the overall celebration and insight on Hollywood productions. The film really does make a point that, when you land big roles like what MaXXXine did in this Puritan movie, being late to the set pushes your production back a lot. Getting along with your co-stars, getting along with your producers and your directors, having good connections with people, having questions about the script when they come up. I think there's a lot of that kind of stuff that gets hinted at and brought up over the course of MaXXXine. I thought all that was very good and successful. It really does feel like we're kind of on the day of the set of some of these production days with MaXXXine, and we kind of get to see how the Night Stalker case kind of worked its way into the productions, and how that made MaXXXine uncomfortable with certain things as the production progressed. I just loved all the celebration and insight and homages to Hollywood productions. I thought that aspect of the film was very successful and well done. And then another thing I thought was very good was the use of VHS tapes and kind of the fuzz screen we would see on TV. You know how, like, when you're on a channel that your cable provider doesn't provide or something like that, the screen will go all fuzzy when you had a cable TV. There's a lot of that in this movie. There's also a lot of use of VHS tapes and people who are recording stuff that are trying to get MaXXXine to do something strictly for them, whether it's a villainous character or something along that line. So I thought the use of VHS tapes, the use of things that were around in the 80s, like tape players and all that stuff that they would use, the fuzz screens on the TV, all of that was very successful and useful for this film. And overall, I thought that was a very effective way to depict the 80s over the course of the night of the runtime of the movie. But for my negatives of MaXXXine, I thought overall the third act was very clunky. It is one of those third acts in a movie where it does try to do so much at once and wrap up so many things. It does really feel like it tries to be a shootout scene and a whodunit revealing, and wrapping up the overall X trilogy with something we saw back from X and all this other stuff. And it just felt kind of clunky to me. It just felt like they really could have benefited from a good rewrite of that portion of the script. All the stuff in Acts 1 and 2 were perfectly fine. But there's just a lot of stuff that happens in that third act that does come off as very clunky to me, and I thought they could have benefited from a good solid rewrite of that portion of the story. I also thought just more time with the overall Puritan film that MaXXXine's a part of. I thought they could have explored some more. We get hints of it. We obviously get some moments of that. But we really don't get to know her co-star, who's played by Lily Collins. We really don't get to... We kind of sort of get to know her producer and director, but really not very much. Not as much as I think I personally would have preferred. And, X and Pearl did such a great job with building characters and building the side characters and making sure they feel like good key players for, Mia Goth to work around with. And this time around, that magic felt a little gone to me. It did feel like I would have liked to have seen more of the stuff going on in this Puritan film production and things like that, because we really don't get to spend a lot of time there, unfortunately. There's also just a lot of small details that get brought up over the film that really could have made for a really cool third act if they played into it some more. There's just a lot of stuff that gets introduced to us that never really... It doesn't really mean anything by the time the film is over with and by the time you get to the third act. One I can safely tell you without giving away spoilers is there's a scene where Mia Goth and Lily Collins are kind of meeting each other at their trailers in this one scene, and Lily Collins does this weird scream thing that's this silent scream, and they use it for this flashback moment and later in the movie, but it was just kind of that's a weird way to first properly introduce yourself to somebody who's doing this weird little silent scream thing that really doesn't kind of mean anything. They just kind of use it for this flashback moment. And yeah, I thought certain moments like that could have just been better and could have meant something more by the third act, because by the time we do get the reveal of who the Night Stalker is, a lot of that kind of doesn't really matter anymore. And I thought that aspect of the story could have been better. And also, another thing about this film that really kind of bothered me too is it felt very casual. There really wasn't a lot of things where, yeah, there's this Night Stalker thing going around, but the stakes don't feel very huge. We all kind of know that Maxine is kind of in a more successful part of her life at this point. It just felt very casual to me, and I really would have liked to have seen more stakes brought forward to the audience, because I did feel like throughout X and throughout Pearl, there is a lot of stakes. There is a lot of deconstruction of characters. There is a lot of everything kind of coming together by the third act, and this time around, I just didn't quite feel that boldness with the writing and the directing. And overall, there's a character played by Michelle Monaghan in this movie, and though I love the character and I love Michelle Monaghan as an actress, I thought the closure to her character was awful. It really was pretty bad. She's they do something with her that I think they're trying to make her look heroic and everything else, but I did not like the way they closed out her character. It felt like a very lame joke that just kind of throw away the character. So I thought her closure to her character could have been better written. Once again, going back to the third act feeling kind of clunky to me. So I thought that aspect of the story also could have been better for this film. And overall, this film does set up for a part four. It really doesn't. I mean, yeah, they kind of close out certain things we saw in X and Pearl, I guess, a little bit. But for the most part, if they wanted to do a story of Maxine in the 90s or Maxine in the 2000s or something, there's just enough room left open where they probably could go down that path if Ty West chose to do so. And I do kind of like the idea of sticking with this trilogy. That it was kind of what Ty West announced to begin with. So I think overall, setting up for a potential part four feels a little cheap to me, unfortunately. Don't get me wrong, I'd be there day one if Ty West wanted to make another one of these, but it did feel like he didn't really want to fully commit to closing out a trilogy. So that's kind of what it felt like to me, unfortunately. So I thought that aspect of the story was also a little disappointing. I also thought the overall reveals could have been stronger. Like I said, I really did not like who they chose for the Night Stalker person. I thought there was just so many things they hinted towards and small details that they could have played into that would have made for a more satisfying result with that. So I thought that aspect of the story was also a little disappointing. But overall, I'm going to give Maxine an 8.5 out of 10. There's tons of things I love about it. There's, the look and the aesthetic, Mia Goth's performance, the connections to X and Pearl, the celebration and insight of Hollywood productions, the use of VHS tapes and fuzz screens on TV were all very successfully used here, but the third act is very clunky. There's small details that end up really not meaning anything at all. More time at the Puritan II film production I thought could have been more fun. Making the film have more high stakes and making it feel so casual, like the way they made it played out. The closure to Michelle Monaghan's character I did not like at all. The overall setup for a part four did feel a little cheap to me, and I think the overall some of the reveals could have also been stronger as well. But 8.5 out of 10 for me. I highly recommend seeing Maxine. There's certainly some things to love about it, but do go into it knowing that it's not perfect, and do go into it knowing that there is some flaws along the way that keep it from being as good as X and Pearl. So 8.5 out of 10 for me. I recommend the movie. Go into it knowing, though, that there is some problems along the way.